A New Orleans Saints trade for Seattle Seahawks wide receiver DK Metcalf simply feels foolish. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. On today's episode of Locked On Saints, New Orleans Saints are not interested in overplaying that offensive line market, with O-line already starting to change teams. New Orleans Saints standing pat and sitting tight. The Saints will be under the salary cap soon. I'll tell you how it happens. And the New Orleans Saints trading for Seattle Seahawks wide receiver DK Metcalf would be a foolish move. Let me explain why. We got all that for you on today's episode. We appreciate you, whether it's your first time or your next time, for being here with us this time, making us your first listen, and being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If the New Orleans Saints were to pull off a trade for wide receiver DK Metcalf, who has requested a trade from the Seattle Seahawks, my genuine opinion is that it would be a foolish move. It would be a foolish move. Not the way that I think the New Orleans Saints should be investing their draft capital. Now, again, like I said yesterday, when we were talking about the Davante Adams deal, or Davante Adams, a potential Davante Adams pursuit, what I think they should do doesn't matter, right? All that matters is what it is that they're going to do. They're not going to make a trade and then all of a sudden, call up their friends over in Seattle and say, you know what, Ross didn't like that trade. Let's undo that. Let's not do that trade. It's not going to make a difference. But I think that it's a move that they should avoid. Couple reasons why. Even though I advocated for, you might be like, oh, Ross, but you advocated for them to sign Davante Adams. Yes, I did. I advocated for them to sign Davante Adams if they're intent upon competing in 2025, because they would have full control over the situation. You're not trading draft picks. You're not trying to work out a $30 million per year contract, which actually the Saints could do, right? Because it doesn't have to be $30 million in 2024. It's a big signing bonus. It's a low base salary. It's an escalating contract towards the back end, all those other things. Like, it's not an impossible thing to work out, but it's not the conducive thing to work out right now. The advocation for it would be to build your vehicle around your eventual driver, right? Derek Carr in 2025, but then who's the quarterback after that? You want to try to make sure they have the best weapons possible. Okay, maybe there's a way that you can go with that, but there's ways to do that with the draft capital that you would be sending to Seattle in order to get it done. One of the big arguments that I heard against the idea of signing Davante Adams was that the team needs to get younger. Well, this is actually a less effective way to get younger, even though you're trading for a younger piece. Yeah, you're signing a 33, 34-year-old Davante Adams for a year, right? You're talking about, you would have to assume that the deal would be a one-year deal that's conducive for both sides in order for anything to even happen with Davante Adams. And you might be trading for a 28, 29-year-old in DK Metcalf, but you're ridding yourself of the assets to select a 21-year-old, a 22-year-old. You're actively hampering your ability to get younger, even though you're trading for the younger prospect than that which you would be signing in a Davante Adams. So let me ask you this. Let's do an either or, and we'll do it this way. A first and a third round pick is the asking price. I would typically say that's probably the asking price, but not what they get. But I think for DK Metcalf, knowing that that's what A.J. Brown was traded for years ago from Tennessee to Philly, kind of in a similar situation. DK Metcalf a little bit older, not coming off of a rookie contract, all that. I think, though, that like the two are still comparable in terms of what you would be able to get value-wise out of them, especially depending upon the team that trades for them. So I think first and a third is what we'll work with. So let me ask you this. Would you rather spend a first and a third and get DK Metcalf and pay him $30 million per year? Or would you rather use a first and a third and draft Chewy McMillan at number 9 and Travion Henderson at number 71? Because yes, you're giving up the earlier of the two third-round picks. And you get both of those guys, the wide receiver out of Arizona and one of the running backs out of Ohio State, on rookie contracts, plus a fifth-year option on Chewy McMillan. But Ross, Chewy McMillan might not be there at 9. No problem. Let's do it again. How about Tyler Warren, the Penn State tight end at 9, and then Deion Walker, the Kentucky defensive tackle at 71? Or Travion Henderson, in the third round, along with Tyler Warren in the first. Kind of like that, a little bit better than like a DK Metcalf. What about your chance to see a Mason Graham potentially fall right into your lap at number 9, and then you can turn around and draft a Trey Harris in the third round out of Ole Miss, the wide receiver. And now all of a sudden you've really big time addressed your defensive line, and you've still gone out there and gotten yourself a wide receiver literally from the same school that can go out there and be a complement to your Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. Oh, Ross, but Trey Harris might not be there in the third round. Okay, fine. Jaden Higgins. You're right. You see what I'm saying? Like, there's always that other person. What about Josh Simmons in the first round, the Ohio State offensive lineman? I don't think he makes sense for New Orleans, but people love the idea of an offensive lineman in the first round. So there you go, offensive lineman in the first round, and then a Savion Williams in the third round if he falls that far, right? Or a Travion Henderson, or a Quinshad Judkins, or a DJ Giddens, or a Mason Taylor. Like, you see what I'm saying? If you're going to spend your first and third round picks, spend your first and third round picks actively adding talent and getting younger, which you're not doing in a trade for DK Metcalf, and you're keeping yourself cost controlled in that situation. I think that that's probably the right way to go. So I don't advocate for a DK Metcalf trade. And look, if the Saints did it and it worked and he turned into, a great option for them and played for a long time and signed another extension and played well into his 30s for the team and, did all these incredible things, then yeah, they look like geniuses. No doubt about it. Like, you make a big move like that, you take a big swing like that and it pays off, you're looked at as having been a genius in that situation, 100%. But I think that the likelihood of that happening is a little bit tough. And so I think investing those draft picks in draft prospects is probably a better way to go. It's interesting. Like, it's funny. Like, the conversation around Davante Adams is, oh, well, you do that, you're not getting younger. Whereas actually a trade for DK Metcalf, who is younger than Davante Adams, is actually the way to where you actively don't get younger. It's really funny the way that the NFL works. So could they do it? Yes. Yeah, they could. I mean, they have the first round pick. They have 2 third round picks. You have your ability to be able to do that. You have your ability to backload contracts and potentially give him that $30 million per year without actually costing yourself $30 million in 2025. But is it the wise thing to do? Perhaps not. Perhaps not. Now, look, the other argument that you can make against that is, hey, DK Metcalf is a surefire thing. You're giving up the first and third round picks to get a surefire player. You're paying a surefire player. Otherwise, you're drafting players that might not pan out in the first and third rounds. Completely understand that. But if the company line is, well, the Saints should get younger, that's not the way that they get younger. And honestly, in this year's draft, I think you're probably a little bit safer using your draft picks anyway than you might be in other drafts because of how good the draft is from a starter perspective. It's not super deep, and the quarterback class is kind of but there's a lot of starters in this class. And so if I'm the New Orleans Saints, I'm not trading a first and a third round pick for DK Metcalf. I'm using my first and third round picks to go out there and build my team and fill needs at multiple spots and continue to drive talent and insert talent into this roster for a long-term run, more than I'm worried about getting DK Metcalf in the hopes it'll help me in 2025 and stick around, and be able to stay healthy long enough and stay effective long enough and stuff like that. Give me the younger guys in that situation. If I'm having to have the conversation around draft picks, I'd rather go and get the younger guys. If I'm just signing somebody off the street, great, nice and easy. So for me, if I'm adding a wide receiver on the open market, it's Davante Adams. And if I'm using those first and third round picks for something, it's one of those pairings that we talked about, not DK Metcalf. That's the way that I look at it. I think it'd be a foolish move. Coming up next, New Orleans Saints have already started their work on getting under the salary cap, and they'll be under the salary cap soon. Let me explain how they'll get it done. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Chewy. You've probably heard of Chewy. They give you everything you need to make your pet happy and healthy. And they make it all super fast, easy, and affordable as well with all the brands you already know and love. Everything from food to toys, things like that, supplies to even healthcare as well. They've got things they do like telehealth vet visits. They've got in-person clinics rolling out nationwide as well. Over 100,000 products from brands that love, and trust. And not just cats and dogs either. Birds, fish, reptiles, small pets as well. They've got you covered over there. And I love their auto ship feature as well. Just keep a constant influx of recurring deliveries coming to make sure you have those staples that you need. for your pet, because that's what Chewy's all about. As a pet owner, I use Chewy all the time. Chewy is all about keeping your pet happy and healthy. Right now, you can save $20 on your first order and get free shipping by going to chewy.com or clicking the link in the description. Save $20 on your first order and get free shipping by clicking that link in the description. Minimum purchase is required. New customers only. Terms and conditions apply. See site for complete details. All right, family. The New Orleans Saints have already begun their work to get under the salary cap with a couple of big moves over the last couple of days. But they still have a lot of work to do, but they'll get under the salary cap here soon. I want to break down how they're going to do it. I figure we'll just keep updating this as we go through. We kind of did this breakdown a few days ago, but now that like some of the moves that we said were going to happen have already happened, let's kind of see where things are, progress report, and see what happens next. So on Fat Tuesday, the New Orleans Saints released or terminated the contract rather of Jamaal Williams. We covered that in yesterday's episode. $1.59 million saved. It's kind of the big thing that you need to know. $2.34 million in dead cap already accounted for. So then the next thing that happened was yesterday, Ash Wednesday, the New Orleans Saints ended up restructuring their contract with Eric McCoy, which effectively is going to save a little bit over $7 million. They took his base salary, reduced it all the way down to veteran minimum, and then restructured that, kind of converted that to a signing bonus, spreading that expense out over the course of 5 years. They took his $500,000 roster bonus and did the same thing. So you're looking at a fifth of what was restructured, plus vet minimum, plus a fifth of the roster bonus, plus the money that they already owed. And so it effectively took his cap hit from like $15+ million to a little bit less than that to save around $7.144 million is kind of the bare bones there. I'm not going to worry about breaking it all down. Insider's got the whole breakdown of the contract. I'll do that for every contract. If you want to see how this kind of stuff is done, text Who Dat to 504-285-7473 or find the insider link in the description. But I'm not going to throw out a bunch of numbers here on a podcast. That's never good for anybody. So if you want that, that's where you can find it. But that's basically the bare bones of it, right? Reduce the base salary, take that roster bonus, restructure all of it, spread it out over the course of 5 years, add that to what's already owed, including that vet minimum, and then bang, you're into your savings. So with the savings of Eric McCoy and also the savings of Jamaal Williams with that release, you're looking at around like close to $9 million saved between those two players. So it takes the Saints from about $46 million over the salary cap to around $36 million over the salary cap, depending upon how the change is. I think over the cap still has them at $39 million, but they should be closer to 36, 37. So we'll see kind of how things move forward there. Over the cap had something weird to where it didn't actually include the roster bonus restructure in the restructure, but reports we're understanding that the roster bonus was restructured. So we'll see overall what the numbers actually look like, but they should be somewhere between that $35 to $39 million range. Here's how they clear that $35 to $39 million range. The first thing that has to happen is the biggest thing that has to happen is that you have to address Derek Carr's contract in some way. Could you pressure him into a pay cut? Yeah, I guess you could. Not necessarily the greatest way to go about your business as an NFL franchise, though, to do that. So what's more likely to happen is that they'll restructure his contract, doing a simple restructure, which includes restructuring his $10 million roster bonus, which is already guaranteed, and a $30 million base salary, which is going to become guaranteed on the third day of the league year, March 14th. Just restructure all that, push it, and then you end up with about $30.1 million in savings. It's really 30.996, but we'll call it 30.1. Yes, that has some impact on your 2026 and 2027. What that full impact looks like, though, is going to depend on if they decide to move on from Derek Carr in 2026. They could designate him as a post-June 1 cut. That changes a little bit about how that cap ends up being impacted because of dead money being deferred and all those other things. And so I think that's one of those pieces to where we're not really going to know what that looks like until they actually get there, right? So we'll figure out kind of where that goes. But for right now, that saves the New Orleans Saints around $30.1 million. That leaves them with somewhere between, what did I have, a $4 million range? So it leaves them somewhere in between $4 to $8 million still over the salary cap. One simple restructure of Cesar Ruiz's contract, which is absolutely expected to happen, falls right in the middle of that, to where it is $6.4 million saved. So that would put the New Orleans Saints in a situation where they're either within $2 million in terms of in either direction. They're either $2 million under or they're $2 million over. Once you restructure Carl Granderson, which is also expected to happen, then you're at a place where you've got money to spend. You're anywhere between $5 to $3 million under the salary cap at that point. So with that, you can now start to look at other opportunities to make money. One of the ones that we've talked about is that you address the contracts of Cameron Jordan as well as Taysom Hill and try to save around $10 million between both of them. I thought I'm going to use Kat Terrell's model, who just did a great article breaking some of this down over at ESPN as well, to where she basically took both of them from their current base salaries down to $6.5 million. That is about it's about a $6 million savings when it comes to Cam Jordan. It's about a $3.5 million savings when it comes to Taysom Hill. So about $9.5 million. Remember, our goal was to be around $10 million saved amongst the two of them, not each. So if we do that for both of these guys and everything, we end up in a situation to where you just saved another about $10 million between those two. So with that being the case, you end up with $12 to $14 million to spend at that point. Then you can make more decisions if you want to. Colin Saunders is absolutely a name to watch. $2.5 million would be saved if he's cut. Does he fit in the system? Does he not fit in the system? 29 years old, not a big deal to me, but the NFL certainly pays a lot of attention to ages as they get closer and closer to 30 years old. And he's in the final year of his contract. Certainly a way to go. Pete Werner just got a new extension. Because he just got a new extension, he's somebody that you could restructure. $2.5 million that you end up saving that way. Just between those two moves, you're hovering around $17 to $19 million, pretty close to $20 million to spend. And that's before you even touch contracts like Demario Davis, who you could restructure if you wanted to. Tyrann Mathieu, who you could restructure if you wanted to. You could move on from a Nathan Shepard if you're cleaning out your entire defensive line. That's another $1.2 million. I've said before, Ben DiNucci's on this roster right now, taking up $1.03 million or whatever it is. Let's say you move on from him, he saved $1.03 million. And then you move on from, let's say, Cedric Wilson Jr., who saves you $2.4 million. That's $3.43 million that you just saved between just those two moves. And then now you're over $20 million to spend in any case. You don't have to make all those moves if you're in New Orleans, and they're not going to make all those moves all at once. There's going to be things that they're doing in the midst of all this that are going to impact that number. That's me stockpiling. But, you re-sign Paulson Adebo, that takes a little bit of money away from what it is that you're trying to spend out on the open market. You re-sign a Chase Young, that ends up being something that ends up having an impact. As you sign more players move in and out of that top 51. You've got 90 on the roster, but only the 51 highest cap hits actually count against your salary cap. So as you're making moves, you're pushing $1 million out as you're exchanging and stuff like that. So it's all weird, and the numbers are all going to be fluid, but it doesn't take much in this year. You're restructuring young guys that are going to be in your roster: Eric McCoy, Cesar Ruiz, Pete Werner, Carl Granderson. You're potentially pursuing pay cuts for guys like Cameron Jordan, as well as Taysom Hill. You're restructuring Derek Carr because that's what the contract was built to do anyway. And you're making moves in terms of cuts more based on who's a fit and who's in the NFL life cycle, more than you're making cuts in order to save money and get under the cap, right? Any cuts that you see are going to be about fit. Any cuts that you see are going to be about value to roll, not really going to be about them trying to get under the salary cap. So pretty good situation for New Orleans here, especially if they do intend to move ahead with Derek Carr. That makes everything a lot easier to get under the salary cap. You're not having to touch as many of those other veteran contracts and things like that. It's a lot of money to restructure, but it's something that this team is ready and certainly willing to do, as they've shown that they'll do it in the past. So New Orleans Saints will be under the salary cap very soon. That is an idea of how I think they're going to get there. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints not overplaying when it comes to offensive line. I'll tell you what I mean as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. If there was any position where the New Orleans Saints could have overreacted when it comes to changing up their roster, it definitely could have been the offensive line. We know the trenches are a big need for the New Orleans Saints, both the offensive line and defensive line. Offensive line's a little bit easier to overreact to because you're trying to protect your quarterback, right? You're trying to protect your greatest asset as a team. And so we see a lot of teams will overreact to opportunities to strengthen their offensive line and things like that. And the New Orleans Saints have done a good job not overplaying their hand at this point. Not overpaying, but overplaying the situation. We know that this is going to be a strong crop of interior offensive linemen in free agency for sure. We've broken that down before. Guys like Patrick Mekari, Mekhi Becton, others that will end up kind of potentially having an impact if the New Orleans Saints were able to sign them. But we don't know if that's going to be the case. But the New Orleans Saints could have rushed to some other names that have already moved. I mean, you take a look here. There have already been 3 kind of big moves on the offensive line that have happened. We saw Alex Kappa released by the Cincinnati Bengals. Quickly, the 30-year-old guard signs a new deal with the Las Vegas Raiders. 2 years, $11.2 million with $5.5 million guaranteed. Not a contract that the New Orleans Saints couldn't have afforded. Not a contract that they couldn't have doled out, but they didn't go that route. You look at the other 2 big moves that happened, both to Chicago. The Chicago Bears sending 2026 picks to get guys like Jonah Jackson, the interior offensive lineman with some versatility, things like that. And they ended up being able to make a move to get him over to the Bears. And then you also saw them make another move with the Kansas City Chiefs to get Joe Thuney, who has tackle guard versatility, over to them. Why didn't the New Orleans Saints not make those moves? It cost a 5th and a 6th round pick in 2026. In order to make each of those moves, why not get involved there? Well, I think dollar dues is a big reason why. $15.5 million base salary for Joe Thuney. Now, none of it's guaranteed, but you're probably not trading for a guy and then giving a pay cut immediately, especially if you're going to start him at left guard. And then you look at a guy like Jonah Jackson, who's only 28 years old. He's got $9 million base salary, $8.5 million roster bonus here in 2025. And he's got a $9 million base salary and an $8 million roster bonus in 2026. So you're looking at over $17 million due to him in each of those years. And so with all of that considered, yeah, I can see why the New Orleans Saints didn't get involved there. And I think it was a good move by them to not overplay each of those situations. Could you part ways with a 2026 draft pick, a 2026 day 3 draft pick? 100%. 100% I think you could. And it'd probably work out fine, but you got to figure out the monetary situation around that. And the New Orleans Saints are not in position to do that at this moment, as they are still $40+ million, $30+ million over the salary cap. It was not the time to make those moves. So instead, the New Orleans Saints get to walk into the market, the open market, in March, and then potentially make a move at that point, unless maybe somebody becomes available that's been cut, and therefore it's not going to mess up your compensatory pick, formula and stuff like that. But you can see that the Saints are kind of safeguarding those draft picks, and I think that that's a good thing. It's one of the reasons why I think that the DK Metcalf move, or a DK Metcalf move, if I want to be clear about that, would be, it's only in potential, but it would be foolish, right? And so I think going out there and doling out more draft capital when you're actively trying to gather as much draft capital as you can right now, spend as much draft capital as you can right now, just doesn't make sense. Doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think it was good on the New Orleans Saints not to overplay that situation. You look at some of the guys that are going to be in the market. One of my favorites is Patrick Mekari coming out of Baltimore. He's somebody that is not expected to have a huge market in terms of his market value. I think teams would be very interested in him because he's kind of like a James Hurst. You can move him around to a bunch of different places. He's got guard experience. He's got tackle experience. I think he's even had center experience in some cases. And so I think finding a guy or going out and signing a guy like that makes a ton of sense. He could plug in as your new starter at left guard or whatever it might be. But even just having him and the ability to be able to move him around, because you might strike it big in the draft. Maybe somebody falls to pick 40 that makes a ton of sense that you want to go ahead and grab, like a Gray Zabel out of North Dakota, excuse me. I was thinking ND, North Dakota State University. And so you signed a Patrick Mekari, but you signed him to a contract that makes sense for him to even just be a 6th offensive lineman that you can deploy and move wherever you want, right? Because Saints not only need to get starters on their offensive line, they need depth on their offensive line. They have to continue to build that. And so it's not just an environment in New Orleans right now to where you're just trying to build up your starting 5. No, like you're trying to build up your 8. You're trying to build up your starting 5 plus 3 is really what you're trying to do. And so being able to land a new starter at left guard and then find those guys that can be those backups for you, I think just as important as going out there and, making these trades and things like that. And acquiring all of this money that you don't have any control over. It's one of the reasons why I think that the open market is the best place to go for the New Orleans Saints when it comes to this offseason. I don't think they need to get involved with any trades because they don't need to do anything where their contract negotiations are being dictated by some other general manager, dictated by some other team, to where that contract is already negotiated. And so you get what you trade for, or you get what you trade for, and then you have to extend on top of that, right? So where you maybe have a little bit more, control over what that can be, but really hard to extend somebody and say, here's what we project you're going to do in the system when I've never seen you in the system before, unless I'm getting you from the Philadelphia Eagles. You know what I mean? But I don't see that being a way to kind of play this. So I think if you're looking at anybody on that Philadelphia Eagles offensive line that could potentially end up in New Orleans, it's Mekhi Becton. Like, the Saints are going to have money to spend. And so all of a sudden, Mekhi Becton becomes a real possibility for the New Orleans Saints, assuming that he actually makes his way out of Philadelphia, which I think at the time that I'm recording this is the case currently. But that could change at any given moment, at any given time. And it's just all about how much Mekhi Becton credits Jeff Stoutland, the offensive line coach over in Philly, for his, kind of finding his place on the interior after moving inside from tackle, or how much he credits Kellen Moore's system for being able to utilize him that way. If he credits Kellen Moore's system and hits the open market, then yeah, I think you have a real connection there. If he credits Jeff Stoutland for his development, which would make sense, he is the position coach and is one of the best, if not the best, offensive line coach in the league. He's been in Philly for 11 years? Then I don't think he's going to leave. You know what I mean? But they have a lot of talent that they have to figure out what they're going to do with. They just paid Zach Bond. Shout out to Zach Bond. 3 years, $51 million. Goes from being a special teams, like a player mostly utilized on special teams here in New Orleans, to one of the highest paid, I think one of the 4 highest paid inside linebackers in the NFL. Like, outstanding. And so I look at, that, Milton Williams, some of the other players that they got to get things figured out with. They've moved on from 2 veteran cornerbacks and James Bradbury, as well as Darius Slayton, and not Darius Slayton, sorry, Darius Slay. Darius Slayton is another name, wide receiver name, actually, that's kind of become available and maybe somebody to watch out for. Would have made more sense when Cody Burns was the wide receivers coach, but, it is what it is. But, I think that the Saints are in good position to potentially see Mekhi Becton hit the market and then go out there and pursue him. And then that's their big money guy. And then they can be, fiscally conservative after that, if they want to be, you know what I mean? Fiscally responsible after that. So we'll see where things go there. But I think it's a good thing that the Saints haven't overplayed the offensive line market, and looks like that they're willing to take this down for the next 6 days, focus on getting under the salary cap, maybe focus on some potential player retention, like Nephi Sewell and Paulson Adebo and maybe Chase Young and all that. But I don't think that, I think that their current patience is good patience when it comes down to what we've seen on the open market so far. All right. We appreciate you very much for being here and making us your first listen. For your second listen, make sure you go and check out Locked On NFL Draft. Coming up tomorrow, more updates on salary cap space. We expect a lot more moves to happen over the course of the next couple of days, particularly this week. And then we'll continue to take a look at other positions of need for the New Orleans Saints, going back to the defensive line in tomorrow's episode. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. They're not a family's doing them, how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.